Hey there, my name is Orion, this is Trina.
Hello.
And you are listening to Brainwaves. Today, we are joined by Joie Laykoff, who is on a mission to change the way we think about school. Joie is the Senior Director of Teaching and Learning at Fusion Education Group. Her background is in special education, psychology, and mindfulness. In today's episode, we talked to Joie about designing programs that help students, especially those with ADHD, thrive, and ways that you, as a parent, can support your child. And with that,
Hello.
So, Joie, I hear that you manage 80 plus campuses. Could you tell me a little bit more about that and what you guys are doing at Fusion Academy?
I definitely can. I think we're at about 82 campuses, and we also have a huge virtual arm to what we do. And Fusion is just an amazing program. It's really unique. I love to talk about it. Also been with Fusion for a very long time. I feel like I look quite young, but when I tell you how long I've been there, you're going to be like, wait, did you start when you were 10 years old? And that is not the case. I've been with Fusion for going on 14 years. So
wait, did you start when you were a teen?
I know, I'm telling you. But what's exciting about that is I actually started at our West Los Angeles location, and it was our first replication.
Oh, wow.
And so our sort of like mothership is in Solana Beach, and our home base, if you will, is in San Diego. And so it's just been a really exciting journey to watch how our schools and our organization has grown from the second school in West LA to now, as you mentioned, over 80 schools. It's really unique about Fusion, and what we're known for is that we work with students in a one-to-one setting, and we focus on really the holistic growth of our students. And let me break that down for just a minute. I think it's always helpful for people to understand that when you walk onto one of our campuses, it's going to look very different from a traditional environment. Again, I noted earlier, we have a virtual program. So I'm just explaining we call them our brick campus locations. But when you walk in, what's really unique about them is because we work with our students one-to-one, our teachers have offices all along the perimeters, and those are their classrooms. And so every hour they're seeing a different student. And then in the center of our campus, we have what we call a homework cafe. We might get into more detail about that later, but the homework cafe is a space where students both complete their independent work and they interact socially with their peers. So it's just a very different feeling when you walk onto a Fusion campus. And while we primarily work with students one-to-one, and that's the program that is most popular, that I think serves the widest range of students, we do also have that virtual program, as I mentioned. We have a self-directed program, an asynchronous program, and we also offer some small group. So there are different options when you enroll at Fusion. I think the biggest thing to take away from it is that everything we do is personalized. So whether that's actually personalizing the instruction within every class that you take, that a student takes, or personalizing the program that we set up for a student, it's going to be unique to each student. So there's a lot more to learn about Fusion, but I'll pause there.
So Trina and I both have ADHD, and I can imagine when I was a kid, first of all, I was late diagnosed, so I didn't even know when I was a kid that I had ADHD, but I can imagine if I was a kid and had access to a program like this, I feel like I would have definitely thrived, I think, because what I know of what you guys do sounds amazing. But I guess I'm curious, for a teen who maybe has ADHD or maybe doesn't excel in a typical education environment, how does Fusion differ? And how are you thinking about education differently?
So it's a great question. And I want to start by just acknowledging that when the Fusion program began a few decades ago, there was nothing like it. And it was either you were in the traditional program or there weren't any other options. And Michelle Rose Gilman is our founder. And when it started in San Diego, the whole idea out of a need for students at a traditional setting not being able to access the instructional environment. And so they would come to Fusion for tutoring support. And then this sort of idea evolved. And the thought was, could this tutoring program be a full-time school rather than being a supplemental program and students having to go all day to a traditional program and then still go to school after that to be able to pass their classes? What if this was the school? And that was incredibly revolutionary. And I think to this day, it still is. We have a lot more options since COVID in terms of interesting programs that students can enroll in that are just gaining more momentum. But this idea is still pretty unique to have students be able to access education in a one-to-one environment and really meet their needs. And so there's a few things that Fusion does really well. First of all, we serve students with social, emotional, and learning differences. And I think what allows us to do that so well is the fact that we work one-to-one with students. And so I mentioned earlier that we emphasize this personalization. And so in our environment, we have total freedom to be able to get creative and differentiate for students based on whatever behaviors are getting in the way of them accessing their learning. So that's number one. The second thing is that we focus on mastery learning. And mastery learning is something that we talk a lot about in the field of education, and it's really hard to do outside of a one-to-one educational setting. And what that means is that we work with students until they demonstrate mastery, whereas in a traditional setting, you have to move on at some point. And there are just limitations in a classroom where you only have a certain number of days in a school year and you have to move on. And if you've got a couple students that aren't grasping the concepts, you just do your best. And it's not to say anything about a teacher, you got to move on. With Fusion, the nice part is that we can continue in the content and make necessary tweaks and adjustments so that students can demonstrate mastery, because we don't have any of those barriers that you might see in other settings. But then there's the third thing, and I think the third thing makes a really big difference, and it's been part of our philosophy since day one, and I think it's the thing that we celebrate ourselves the most for, which is that we consider our teachers mentors, not just teachers. And so we prioritize relationship first. And so we have this really cool kind of pedagogy philosophy where we put love at the foundation. We've been unafraid to talk about that, in that students have to feel really cared for in the classroom and really seen and valued. And from there, we've got this pyramid. It goes love, and then it goes motivate, and then teach at the top. And the idea is that you cannot get to that instruction part until a student feels seen and cared for. You can't even start to motivate them until that's there. So just to summarize all of that, personalization, the mastery piece, and the relationship-based teaching, those are the three things that really make us unique.
I think it's interesting because when you think about like traditional schooling, you're right. Like you have a classroom of 30 plus kids and have to go for the common denominator, right? Where it's, okay, this is where the average of the class is, and now we can move on. We have this curriculum that we have to stick to. For folks who don't match that kind of standard way of being taught, like you get left behind.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
And I'll say too, Orion, it's not, we think that the students who aren't doing well in that traditional setting, maybe they don't have the aptitude. And that's not the case at all.
Yeah.
And so many of our students will come in and they will be impacted by a learning difference. By the way, also maybe something socially is going on, something emotional is going on. That is very common among adolescents. I didn't say this earlier, but we serve middle and high school students. And so that social emotional development during those times is just a little chaotic. It's something is getting in the way, and it doesn't mean that there's something wrong. And I'll say that to anyone who's listening, it's something wrong with your child. It just means that they need a little more attention and personalization. And we see that for a lot of our students, that they might come to us and have failed a series of math classes and think they're terrible at math. And then it's, okay, let's slow down a little bit. Let's back up. Let's tweak some things here and there. And it turns out now, you're seeing this student really excel and find a love for a subject that was totally getting in the way of their whole self-perception.
You mentioned before this kind of like pyramid of the relationship. I'm curious, why do you think that's so hard for like standardized education? But then also, why do you think that works so well for you guys?
I think it's really just the system. And so I'm a classroom teacher, and that's my background. My background is in special education. And interesting too, when you had said earlier, I have ADHD and I would have thrived in a program like this. I have a very similar recollection and sentiment of the students that I used to work with, and how each of them were with their own differences. And I struggled to serve them in a classroom setting only because everyone needed something a little bit different. So it wasn't that I was an incredibly motivated and caring and compassionate. I think I had the right mindset and philosophy as a teacher to bring that love and care into the classroom. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to, first of all, I was teaching middle school, so I was shuffling between a lot of different subjects, but it was really hard for me to be able to take that time and address each student individually. And I would find certain ways. I would invite students up to my desk and we would spend time together, and we would do like rotations where I would be able to give them feedback on their work specifically. But let me tell you, if a student was having a bad day, or if I recognized in one of those feedback sessions that the student really needed some more reteaching, that's when I would get stuck. I would, okay, let's talk at lunch. Okay, can you stay after school a little bit later and we can work through this? So I don't think it's for a lack of care by any teacher, by most teachers. I'm sure we've all had a teacher or two that we thought that was the case, but I think the system makes it really difficult to give that personalized attention. And that's why I say it's the setting, the fusion setting, that one-to-one. We get a lot of teachers who teach for fusion because they also didn't feel like they were finding success with students in the classroom. And they're going, oh, you can teach one-to-one? Okay, that's pretty cool. I can start to see more tangibly how my students are making gains, or I can start to really slow down and meet their needs, because teachers are feeling it too, not just the students. They know the kids that they're not reaching, and they just frankly don't have the time.
Trina, I'm wondering if your experience was the same. I know, like, for me, growing up in school, I certainly had those teachers that were able to notice me and call me out and focus on me and give me that attention that I needed. And they definitely made all the difference. And I can imagine like how important that is for a kid.
Where you were talking about like math, I was thinking about how in high school I really struggled in the math classes. And then when I got to college, there were just a lot more resources. There was tutoring, there was more help, more one-on-one help available. And I was actually really good at math, and I thought I was horrible at math in high school. So I could see how one-on-one or like very personalized care would make sense, especially for an ADHD child or teenager. And then also like the amount of distractions in a public school, like when I'm trying to learn in a room full of 30 students, and like I can hear every pencil, I can hear every noise, and the kids that are throwing paper, and like how truly distracting that was for me in an educational setting. And so, yeah, I could see why it would work for maybe a neurodivergent teenager.
We work with a lot of students who have ADHD. Frankly, we also work with a lot of adults who, again, I think are recognizing that this might be a better alternative, and also have an easier time with that connection with their student and valuing that teaching dynamic. But all the things I think that plague our students that have ADHD, it's really difficult. The disorganization that comes up, that's something that we can very much mentor and guide in both the classroom and the homework cafe. As I was mentioning earlier, we have our homework cafe staffed with teachers as well. So it's a place for that independent work to be done. It's a place for socialization. There's multiple homework cafes on each campus, and we have adults in there that are helping to guide with executive function skills especially. But Trina, exactly with the distraction, I think that's a great example of where just the context itself, just being one-to-one without adding any sort of pedagogy there, that allows for the learning to be a lot more accessible. But I think the thing that we see that's most, in some ways, it's like heartbreaking. And then, so a lot of our students will come in with really low confidence and feeling like, what's this whole education institution about, and that discouragement. And that's sometimes at best. At worst, it's I'm just not going to go to school anymore. And then they come to Fusion and give us a chance and work with our teachers, our mentors, again, one and the same for us. And you start to see that confidence build over time. And a lot of times we'll sit in intakes with families and you'll ask, what are post-secondary plans? And there may not be any because the confidence isn't there. Again, it doesn't mean like, the skills are there, they're hiding, the aptitude is there. And so then those conversations start to generate a little more slowly over time. Okay, could be a future here. So we get to experience those success stories a lot. And I say it's heartbreaking because sometimes we feel like maybe it took students a really long time to get to Fusion, and we wish we could have started with them sooner, and we hate to see them beginning with us in a place that feels so low. But then a lot of our staff will tell you that their favorite days are our graduation days, because the stories that each of our students tell, they get on stage and give their own speech. Every student is remarkable. So I got a cool job.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's interesting, the confidence part, because I'm thinking back to when I was in school, and there were certain, like math is certainly one of those. I think with most people deal with this, but it's especially insidious with folks with ADHD because there's this kind of weird mental trick that happens when you try something and you don't get that immediate dopamine. You're like, I don't want to do this anymore. And so with schooling, you end up in this situation where, okay, you're in a math class and you sit down to do the speed test or whatever, and your brain is like distracted and all these things happen. You get an F, and now you're like, I'm bad at math. I hate this. I don't ever want to do this again. But it's just that, like we were saying, I've never had the opportunity to be good at it, to experience what being good at it is. And that the traditional schooling system isn't set up to give me that opportunity. And so then I exclude it from my future because I don't get dopamine from this. So it's not something I'm interested in.
And so remember I was talking about that pyramid, and that middle part is the motivate. And we often will say success begets more success. The idea is it may mean that you have to lower the bar for a moment, but then you can build on that. And so the idea always is, I think I said this earlier, just meeting students where they're at. Because so much of this is about the emotional attachment or detachment that they have to learning. And so if we can build that relationship, so then there's this safe environment. Once there's that trusted dynamic between the teacher and the student, then we can start to understand, first of all, what their goals are, what their interests are. That's part of motivation as well. Where their strengths lie, that plays into the instruction side of things. And then in that instruction, whatever it is that's going to make this student feel successful. We may not step into writing an entire essay or reading an entire novel or what have you. What we say as teachers, as trained teachers, we always want to look at that zone of proximal development. So it's that thing that's gonna just right outside of a student's ability to do it with an instructor, right? So it's it's gonna push them just a little bit, but not so far that they're gonna give up.
Imagine that there's a lot of parents listening to this interview, even especially that they see their child struggling, or they see their child already past the struggling phase and in the disinterested phase, and they know that their child is smart and capable. And there's this disconnect, I can imagine, for a parent to say, I know that they're capable, but I just don't know how to get them from A to B. And I'm wondering if maybe you could shine a light on, maybe for a parent who's looking to bridge that gap with their child. What are some things that maybe they could start doing at home, or maybe even just reframes on how they can start thinking about this?
And I'll call out too, one of the things that we did as part of the homework cafe is we recognized that a lot of our families were coming in just feeling so much frustration within the family system. And so it's not just the weight of it that the student themselves or the child was carrying, but it was impacting everyone. And so what we do at Fusion is we do our best to make sure that none of that independent work goes home, that it's done on campus. And we have daily communication that goes out to families, but what we really want to do is, again, recognizing that our goal is to support the student holistically, that we're removing some of that stress that was happening with the family, hopefully creating an opportunity for those relationships to heal. And so if you're a parent at home and you're working with your child and you're noticing that there are these frustrating conversations and they're not having success, first and foremost, I think the most important thing is look at our framework a bit and just focus on the relationship with your child and take academics out of the picture, because that is likely coming from your own fear as a parent. It's absolutely understandable, but at the same time, that's probably going to be exacerbating what's happening for your child. And so working on meet them where they're at, have fun with them, have conversations with them that have nothing to do with academics, show that you care, be consistent, provide that unconditional support for them. And I do think it's important to connect with their teachers and determine if there's a different type of program out there that would help. And so we can pull that thread about what to do at home. But I think at this point, if you're a parent listening to this podcast and things have been really challenging, I would actually say loosen the grip on the academics right now and focus more on the relationship, because that's going to have the longer term effect. And then I think there's this effort towards how do we help bridge whatever gap is existing within the school. And there are a couple of things that I would say based on my experience. I didn't mention this earlier. I know, Orion, you had asked me, but I previously had started as a teacher at Fusion, and then I was our director of education and then our head of school at that West LA location. And then for the past probably 8 years now, I've been on our education team. So I spent many years directly with families on that campus. And I think there are a lot of things that you can do if you don't feel like you're necessarily in the right program, and what to be looking for from teachers. So we can pull that thread, or we can talk about what to do at home.
Yeah, maybe a good question. And Trina, definitely jump in here because I know you have a teen right now. I'm curious, when you have teens joining the program, what are some of the things that parents and teens are struggling with? And do you often notice that there might even be, because you mentioned pulling off the reins a little bit and letting go because you might be creating unhelpful pressure. And I'm curious, do you see people coming in with these, this is what my teen is struggling with, and this is what we need to fix? But then maybe there being like a reframe or a disconnect somewhere.
I think many times when things aren't going according to plan, we might have a sense of our child is doing something wrong or is broken in some way. And I think it's really important to start to take more of that strength-based approach with your child. And it is very easy. We have that negativity bias already built into the way that we're modeled as humans. And it's easy for us to pay attention, especially if you have a child with ADHD. Like, you're distracted, you're disorganized, again, the success in school, like those things are going wrong, or that comment of, can you just pay attention? And so it's easy to focus on those things. So I think it does require some intention to focus on what is it that your child is having success with and funneling your energy and attention in that direction. So it may be some extracurriculars. It may be just the way that if they're helpful at home, it could be that they have a particular hobby or interest that they're investing in themselves and starting to get a bit more curious there, or seeing if there's additional opportunities to help strengthen that. But I think a lot of times it is focusing our attention on what's going well versus what's not going well. And I think when we can focus on what's going well, then we can start to figure out how do we, again, as I mentioned, like how do we invest more of our time and energy into that? And I think that's something that is a best practice is with well-being, but I think with our kids, we can get easily distracted. So I would say that's one reframe. A lot of times when families will come in and talk with us about their child, it is oftentimes about what's not going well. And so for us, because we know that we can personalize, we start to ask more questions about what has worked well in the past, and what are strategies that seem to go over well? What are some of the things that they're interested in? Tell us about the last project that they seem to invest a bit more time in, or if they were to pick out a book right now, what topic would they be most interested in reading? So it's not so much looking at what's not going well, where is it that we have some opportunities? And I think that can make a big difference.
I love that because we talk so much about like strengths-based approach here at Shimmer. Like, it definitely aligns with like how we talk with our members and how we talk on the podcast, and everything we talk about is very like strengths-based approach. And even within our team, we're always like trying to like study our strengths and our values and like and we try to hone in on those. So like definitely makes sense to me that would like work for teens with ADHD because it works for me as an adult with ADHD. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And then also I made a little mental note because the pyramid that you guys use with love at the bottom and then motivate and then teach, like that makes sense also for parents, in my opinion. Like, I have a teenager and like I feel like I like that. Like, love is the foundation, and then motivate, always trying to motivate her to get stuff done. And then that pyramid makes sense for me. For that could also work at home. I believe that could be a good place to start.
I also feel like it's important that when we're talking about our child, we don't define them by the diagnosis. And this is come up as far as how we personalize in the classroom, because we don't look at any diagnosis, and believe that we understand who this child is. And maybe as a parent, there's been so much talk about the ADHD that your child becomes the ADHD. And so I think there's an opportunity to step away from that and say, well, what are the behaviors are most problematic right now? And I think in some ways that can tighten the lens a bit and make it feel a bit more manageable. Because it's the analogy of eating an elephant. It's let's just take those small pieces here. And is it the distractibility? Is it the disorganization? What is it? Is it the prioritization? Pick a couple of things that are really getting in the way. And I think partnering with our children, particularly when we're talking about those that we serve, middle and high school students, and I having them in that conversation to be like, okay, what's feeling the most difficult right now? And then, okay, from there, if it's the disorganization, are we open to trying a couple of things? And we do this practice a lot at Fusion. It's called collaborative problem solving, where you are collaborating with the students. And it's a practice that's used at home as well. In fact, I think it is very promising when used between parents and children. But just identify the problem together and then to say, okay, let's come up with some solutions. So if it is the disorganization, if it is the prioritization, but it's not the whole thing, it's not all the things that we're having trouble with, but let's just choose one. And I do think sometimes like that can bring the overwhelm down a bit.
I think that's such a powerful thing, especially for confidence for your teen, is you go from this stage of being a parent and having to manage a toddler and having to wrangle them, and you're constantly corralling them, to now you have a young adult who has their own wants, their own desires, their own needs, and you're scared for them because you're about to push them out into the world. And this kind of maybe this feeling of I need to corral them even more to make sure that they're doing what they need to, this protection kind of kicks in. But I think that collaborative problem solving aspect is super interesting to me because now you're no longer their shepherd, you're inviting them in to have control over their life. I know for me, like that's going to be the best thing that's going to help me feel confident is having experience making decisions.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's like teaching our children, because I think the more we talk about the diagnosis, the more it becomes the central difficulty in our lives. And I think it's important in the way that we can help our children, our students learn about who they are. I think that is helpful. And so it doesn't have to be this enemy for them, this window into maybe something that has felt really confusing and made you feel really different. And now you've got some language around it. And so as a parent, maybe allowing this opportunity to help your child learn about themselves be more prominent than the progress that they're making through school. We just sometimes have to push that to the side and say, okay, right now is an opportunity to maybe build some awareness and to build some skills, but not necessarily be hyper focused on achievement. So I would say if you're listening to this and you have a child with ADHD and school hasn't been going well, I would pause on the emphasis of that for a moment and I would lean into building relationships with your child. I think that is first and foremost what we emphasize at Fusion, and I think it is a piece of advice that is both something that drives our education philosophy, but is just as valuable in the personal world. But I'll also say something else. If school is not going well, your child needs you to be their advocate. And it is important for us to look for schools that have philosophies and approaches where the adults are caring, they're creative, they're curious. And it doesn't mean going to battle with your child's school program, but I think walking away from this podcast and just knowing that there are a lot of creative options out there. And if your child is not experiencing success and instead you're seeing their confidence wane, let's start to look for something different. Build your relationship with your child and let's start to look for something different because it doesn't have to be this hard.
I love that. Yep.
Ran away